I actually think that's very valid, but at the same time, how much can we actually step back? Because the site also changes, the site specificity will also change. And then the scale of the programs also change. So even if I'm doing a white box, let's say something that's suitable right now, it's a 40-foot by 40-foot white box, might not be suitable in the future, 60 to 80 foot. So I think no matter how general we can be when doing some sort of publicness, that already inserts a kind of scalarness towards it, and that already owns an authority. So no matter how hard we try to step back, I don't think there's a way to make it completely flexible. Certain markets may be easier to do for example, transferring from a wet market to, let's say, supermarket stalls. Those kind of program flexibility is much more interchangeable. But I do think the question to the students, maybe also us generation of architects is, how do we establish or prevent publicness from the way of thinking of maybe walking? Or something that I'm also very interested in is, does the public space actually becomes functionless? It's something that's within the program that actually becomes public. As soon as you still serve the program, let's say even the opera house that we brought up in the beginning, it becomes kind of like an eventscape. If there's a certain time, there's a certain event that happens for that specific publicness. But I'm curious on this semester's exploration on time as well as this balance between access and time. And I think that is maybe a crucial kind of discussion or swinging point to actually think about.
I think on the topic of general and specific, it's a perfect opportunity to tap into Yuanzhen's experience in maybe share with us on your experience in working on so many public buildings, especially in this part of the world. The politics, the harsh environments, multiple layers of complexity.
We visited several of the public buildings in Kaohsiung last Saturday. And some of you asked me some very intriguing questions, like how they make a decision, whose decision is that, and how and when, and what's the most suitable design style, per se. I think that's a very, I think for the tour of Saturday, that starts very good conversation about what is public, who is the public. Because what we imagine about, when you visit Weibulin, I explained some of the story with, some of you heard of the story, like the public we imagine when we work in the Netherlands, it's slightly different from the public that we imagine. For example, like foyer, what do you think of integration? It's completely different. So I think for your time, and especially like I had a conversation with Faye about the population. For example, the population of Hong Kong now is 8 million. 8 million. It's like 1/3 of Taiwanese population and all live within a city. And well, in this way, I can totally understand the pressure when you're talking about market. It's like, for the public point of view, for the government point of view, maybe they think that I need to make the land more efficient, much more efficient than that, of course, I'll be vertically. So, I think from my experience, what I can share here with you is, when you talk about public, I think from all view point of view, of course, your public may be different from his public. Because of what's say public is a very intriguing term. Is I once had a conversation with a pianist, a solo pianist. She told me the most difficult performance she ever had is to have a show for a single person, for one piece. When she had a concert for maybe 2,000 pieces, then that's easy for her because she knows that's the public. That she had an ideal version of what the public like to have. So in I think for the third year, it's very valuable training. Just of course, training is to start to have your own value, your standard, or say a utopia in your heart. To say what you think is the best is for our practice now, our everyday practice, find our utopia with our clients. And sometimes with the public, say public citizens, we always have a lot of public hearing. And I think that's for some of your background, that's also a very intriguing experience. Maybe it's an intriguing experience because for some of, what I'm saying, some of the students they are from China. And for China, that's completely different policy making, decision making. And from in Hong Kong, that's also different. And in Taiwan, it's different. So I know sometimes I still miss the experience we had in China. That's very straightforward. But for most of the time, I prefer this long-term policy making, decision making. In the end, that would be the common decision for all of us. And the very last thing I would like to share with you is why I still continue teaching. What I'm thinking is because when I retire, when I become the person who is not empowered in this society, who is the one empowered? It's the student that's younger than me for like 20 years. When I retire and I'm like age of 70s or 80s, 70s. Now I go back to 70s. So that's the person who empowers the one in 50s. So that's most of it is you. So I am trying to, the reason why I continue, because I have been a part-time faculty for 12 years. And I still continue doing that because I try to do something when I retire. Society will become the one I imagine I would love to. That's what I want.
So I would like to add a little bit to this idea about specificity and kind of the white box, right? In a way, I think when we talk about the white box, you think, oh, it's flexible, right? But in a way, I think it's actually quite the opposite. And I remember when Riser Uemoto came to do their lecture here last semester, or last year, I can't remember when. They were talking about their experience at the, the Pop Music Center in Taipei, right? Where when they went to visit the site, they looked and they were like, this is not how we imagined or planned these spaces would be used at all, right? And it became, I think, this idea of, I don't know if, how common it is, but this idea of our role as architects to create affordances, right? Rather than creating specific spaces and that are for serve specific functions, actually, what we're trying to do is to create the most opportunity, right? For instance, in this space alone, I mean, one of the things I always thought was the most interesting part of this space was this column here, right? That kind of comes down in the middle, and then there's that landing, right? But that landing is always used. The first place people sit or come down is they sit at the base of that column, right? Just because there happens to be that landing there, right? So what I mean is, the white box is actually very limiting, right? But actually, when you think about what you're trying to do is actually, what you want to do is you want to create affordances. You want to create opportunities, right? And you don't need to know exactly what's going to happen there, but you know that somebody is going to come by and figure that out for you, right? So having that kind of balance between specificity and flexibility, I think, is really important.
So we talked about publicness, we talked about public life, public building, and characters that's kind of attached to architecture and affordances, anticipate uncertainty or just interpretation of use. Maybe it's a good segue to talk about how to do that, how to communicate that essence or allow that nuance to be taught in the student. So in pedagogy, it's about methods and practice of teaching. How do we do that? So maybe David can share with
get to that, what specifically makes something comfortable. Your front of the court, the column is very helpful to that. But it's about, we try to encourage students to understand how they perceive things and how the perception of that affects how they feel. And I suppose we started it by, we had quite a wide selection of questions, and then a range of topics that they could filter their focus on, and then they produce drawings and really try to illustrate that idea. And it was trying to be very clear about what was going on. So it's anti-white box, I suppose, is one aspect. And then the other thing is we then repeat the exercise looking at the MSBs and trying to find something specific that has similar, mostly uncomfortable impact. And then I suppose one other point I want to make, to go back to your point earlier about undermining the plan. I think you can educate the plan. And then the other thing is that I think a lot of the issues with the MSB comes from the client relationship, in that they are ASB is government and they're government buildings, and there's no
I actually have a question on affordances. Something that came to mind is also the scalar problem. I think affordances and incidents happens to a certain extent you can predict when it's a manageable scale, and let's say roughly a group of people scale that you can sort of design, and maybe for some of our studios we focus that as a moment model and that as a methodology to encourage them to think of these affordances as a moment. But I'm also curious, how do we then predict on an urban scale? Let's say one of the buildings we visited, when we're in building, that scale is much more massive. And how do we then kind of bring affordances beyond the scale of, let's say, 5 or 10 people and back to the site? And I think that's maybe something. I'm also curious what
You want to use a wave week as a way to the surfaces.
When we, in the beginning, that people actually didn't expect that it would be that successful with the contest. So in the end, that really became the place for the. In the beginning, we imagined it could be of course, our slogan is a living room for Kaohsiung. And in the end, it becomes it really looks successful in a way. And like in the foyer, in the beginning, in the foyer of the roof foyer, the third floor, in the beginning, actually, it's private. It's the foyer for the opera, foyer for concert hall. But in the end, it has become completely public. It really opens to the public. You have a souvenir shop that all you have come to, and this bookstore. And you also have this museum or exhibition space for all the bad news. And the public, the use of the public is actually, it will change. It will actually really change by the user. And when you can, I think from experience or say the design of you have to anticipate what the user would like to have. And especially when you think of the lifestyle. When we designed in the very, very beginning, that we think of the building was the place that we imagine the ideal we have is the building is the place for all of the people of all ages, of all backgrounds. And I'm very glad that in the end, since people really come with family, they come to the show, and I think that would be something that the public building you have now is you have to anticipate or say you have to build up a goal or say a dream that you would like it to be.
Okay.
structured education where we go from like site analysis and then programming and then, next step, right? But I think given that the semesters haven't gotten longer, but we've added so much material to our curriculum, as architecture has advanced, it's become difficult and we've lost something, right? And I think in our education process, what we've lost is a lot of kind of space consideration. So we rarely, I rarely see students, designing through perspective anymore. Right? They're never thinking about what it's like to actually move through those spaces. They're always thinking about it from like diagrammatic and boxes and spaces. And in that way, I think there's something lost there because that process is very time consuming, right? But I think it's what really allows us to think about the public, the user, right? And so, again, that's one of the reasons why I really try to change the third year this year so that we have more time, right? So that the students can get to the point where they're actually thinking about the space as if they were a user instead of thinking about it as an object.
Time is a really good thing to have because I mean for us the semester is relatively short. But I mean the scale, to me